joining. All right, yes, it is being recorded. Okay, hi. My name is Caitlin, and I work at Square Books in Oxford, Mississippi. I'll be your host this evening. Before we dive into Revival Season by Monica West, and she's joined in conversation by Kiese Laymon, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping, tell you about some other really great events that we have coming up. I'll try to keep it brief. All right, so next Wednesday, June 2nd at 5:30 p.m. Central Time, we have a Tasmanian author, Richard Flanagan. He's going to be here for his newest book, The Living Sea of Waking Dreams. You might remember him from his Man Booker Award winning Narrow Road to the Deep North. But we're thrilled to have him back again, and that is 5:30 June 2nd. He'll be joined in conversation by Doug Roberts, who is Square Books family, and we're just so thrilled for them. Then next Tuesday, June 8th, cousin, or I don't know, it seems like if you're interested in Revival Season, you might also be interested in this one. We'll be hosting Paul Mendez in conversation with Maza Mengiste for Paul's debut novel, Rainbow Milk. It's devastating, beautiful, a bold reckoning with race, class, sexuality, freedom, and religion across generations, times, and cultures. One of the main characters really kind of grapples with his Jehovah's Witness upbringing. And this is really like, all of our virtual events are magical, but Paul's in the UK and we wouldn't be able to host him without Zoom. So again, Tuesday, June 8th, 6 p.m. Then Thursday, June 10th, at 5:30, we're going to see Kiese again in conversation with Nafisa Thompson Spires for the triumphant reissuing of Long Division. So don't miss that either. And then last one, Monday, June 14th at 5:30 p.m., we'll have Rivka Galkin in conversation with Alexandra Kleeman. It's her first stab at historical fiction, but it's not your grandma's historical fiction. It should be great. Enough about them. Let's talk about Monica and Kiese. Born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, Monica West received her BA from Duke University, her MA from New York University, and her MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she was the Rona Jaffe Graduate Fellow. She was a Southern Methodist University Kimbilio Fellow in 2014, and she will be a Hedgebrook Writer-in-Residence in 2021. Revival Season is her first novel. Born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi, Kiese Laymon, a professor in English and creative writing at the University of Mississippi, is the author of the novel Long Division, the memoir Heavy, and the essay collection How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America. But I'm sure everyone's tired of hearing me talk, so I'm going to pass it along to you two. If y'all have questions, please submit them in the Q&A and we'll be sure to answer those. Thank y'all both so much for joining us. This is such an honor. I'm so excited. Thank y'all.
All right.
Thank you.
Monica, you can hear me? Hello?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Hello?
Uh-oh. I hear you.
Okay. Maybe there's a delay. I don't know if there's a delay, but let me just do what I want to do and then try to see if there's a delay on mine. First of all, okay. Thank everyone for being here. Thank you, Caitlin, for making this possible. Monica, thank you for having the skills, the will, the heart to go into a familial cultural sort of way of life that a lot of us are terrified of exploring, non-fictively or fictively. And Revival Season is a book that I think a lot of people are going to talk about, like, you know, the idea behind the book, the ideas in the book. And because of that, I think it's really crucial that we listen to the crafting of the sentences. So before we actually start a conversation, I would love if you could like read a few pages of this for people who haven't gotten it yet. And y'all, listen, those of people out here listening, please, if you have questions for Monica, put them in the chat or in the question and answer part. We're gonna try to weave them in organically as possible. But Monica, could you start this off with a little reading for us?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. So the section I'm going to read comes from the beginning of the book. The context for the book is it follows a 15-year-old narrator named Miriam Horton, and her father is a famous revival preacher and faith healer. And in the summers, they travel and they do these tent healings, these tent revivals. And so the section I'm going to read at the beginning is from the first healing that happens on the summer revival circuit. And there's a hint of something that has happened that's pretty awful the year before that the family's trying to forget. But in this specific moment, they're kind of on this, here for this healing and present for the healing. And so I'm going to read from this first really pivotal healing from the first revival season. After the sermon ended, we waited for the event that most of the people had come for, the healing. Even though the sermon had been better than I imagined it could be, my expanding chest got tight beneath my dress when Papa made the announcement. While they came, about 80 of them, Papa wiped the sweat that had beaded on his brow. There were the typical people who came for healing, older people meandering to the front, young families whose ailments were invisible to the naked eye. My gaze drifted to a woman who slowly led a little boy down the aisle runner. Silver rings like thick bangles kept his forearms in place, while his small hands gripped the handles of his crutches. His legs, even thinner than his arms, had rigid plastic braces on them, and his knees were bent as he slid his legs, one in front of the other, toward the raised altar. Hannah's right eye fixed on him, slowly followed by her roving left eye that had been blind since birth. Her rocking stilled, and throaty grunting sounds came from the recesses of her body. I placed my arm around her shoulders where her bones jutted out from underneath her shirt's thin jersey material. Then Papa saw them. He dried his hands against his pants, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. I sucked in a breath. Papa sprinkled holy oil in his hands and made the sign of the cross on each forehead that he passed. These were the healings that we couldn't see. Since we'd be in another city in a week, there was no way we'd be able to know if the old woman was cured of her hypertension or if the mechanic's tumor shrank. But if this boy could walk, everything that had happened last year would vanish like vapor. Finally, at the end of the line of people, he came to the small boy. He slipped his hand underneath the boy's armpit and guided him toward the stairs. The boy's mother stayed on the ground as his crutches hit the wood of the makeshift steps. Her hands worried the fabric of her long skirt as her son and Papa slowly ascended to the altar right beneath the cross. Son, are you ready to walk? Papa asked. It was a rhetorical question, but the little boy nodded anyway. Congregation, are we ready for a miracle? A hum rose from the crowd, first soft, then louder before it floated into the tent's peaked roof. As Papa got down on one knee in his fancy suit pants, I imagined the prickly feel of the turf beneath the thin fabric, as though I had slipped on his skin for a moment. He was now inches away from the boy's face, aware that any errant motion would compromise this healing that he needed, that we needed. His heart, like mine, must have been beating faster than the snare drum keeping time in the corner of the room. He said something to the little boy that no one could hear. The boy laughed, and Papa tousled his close-cropped afro. In his right fist, Papa still had the small bottle of holy oil, and he more than he used regular heat. He tilted the boy's head back, and the boy stumbled on his crutches. Papa applied the holy oil in a slow sign of the cross in the middle of the boy's forehead. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen, I whispered. Papa placed his entire palm, fingertips stretched and quivering, on the boy's head. Papa often talked about how his whole body would quake with the power of the Holy Spirit when Jesus worked through him. He said that the feeling was like getting electrocuted. The boy trembled like Papa's hand, his thin arms moving around in his crutches like hula hoops. Papa kept praying, pressing his hand on the boy's head. What he was saying was between him, God, and the boy. When Papa finally stood up, he backed away from the boy. Drop your crutches and walk, son. My fingernails had bent back against the metal chair by the time Ma's warm grip landed on my hand. I reached out my other hand and grabbed Hannah's as the boy shifted his thick shoes ever so slightly. Even though Papa wasn't touching him anymore, the boy was still shaking. Then a crutch fell and he dropped to his knees. His mother ran up to the stage in her dingy cotton dress. Wait, Papa said, extending his arm to still her. Have faith, God is still working. The woman took a step back, but she was clearly torn between Papa's belief in his own power and her son, who was on his knees at the altar. Get up, I whispered as the boy rocked on his knees, no closer to standing even as my words chided him. I prayed that the boy's slowness wouldn't spark the same anger that had inhabited Papa last summer. Papa took one step closer to the boy, and Ma's hand became a vice on mine, squeezing out all the feeling until it was numb. Come on, son, Papa said with a sweet voice that would have made anyone get up. Rise up and walk. Sweat rained from Papa's forehead to the turf. The hundreds of pairs of eyes in the tent were fixed on him, their expressions ranging from hope to frustration to blankness. Rise up and walk. Papa extended his arms again, but this time he raised them like a puppeteer whose invisible marionette strings connected to the boy's legs. In slow motion, the boy put his hands on the ground and straightened his legs, his knees knocked together in the plastic braces. Rise up and walk, Papa said again, his words salve to loosen the boy's stiff joints. The boy stood on all fours as his legs inched closer to his hands. He moved ever so slightly. Then he was on his feet, shaking but on his feet, and I was on mine too, shouting amen. A sharp tug yanked the hem of my skirt, sending me right back to the seat. But I started something, because then everyone was cheering as the boy took one wobbly step and then another. Papa flopped on the altar, seemingly exhausted even though he wasn't the one who just walked. The boy's mother rushed onto the stage and her son collapsed into her embrace. Papa raised his arms to lead the congregation in a benediction. We all rose under the spell of his puppeteer hands as the light from above cast an iridescent glimmer on his sweat. Only when revival was officially over did Ma let my hand go, yet I still felt the warmth and pressure of her fingers as I flexed mine. As Ma exhaled her relief, the boy's mother shouted above the booming applause, her voice reaching all parts of the tent from the mic pinned to Papa's suit jacket. Glory to God and to a shepherd on earth. Thank you, Reverend Horton, thank you. I nudged Ma with my elbow to catch her eye, but she wouldn't look at me. Her smooth forehead had already erased the doubt of just a few minutes before as she applauded for him. I joined in, even as crowds with ravenous eyes surged the stage and swarmed Papa, their hands eager for a touch of his garment. I wanted to join them, but knew that it wouldn't be proper. So my hands clapped themselves raw from the fourth row until the residue of last summer's memories was wiped clean.
Ooh, wee. Yes, indeed. Let me encourage you all again throughout this conversation. If you have questions, put them in the question and answer thing or the chat. Thank you for that. You know what? I love your use of the word cheering in that excerpt because, you know, yes, those of us who grew up in Black Baptist churches know that is exactly what we do, but it's so what we also do for teams that we revere, right? And in so many ways, like my church, which was Concord Missionary Baptist Church, was in some way like the first team I was encouraged to cheer for. Can we just talk? I didn't think I was going to talk about cheering, but can we talk about your use of the word cheering before I get into like what I really want to get into?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think I agree with you. There's a sense, especially with the way that things happen on this revival circuit or on any of the other revivals, that there's a collective body of people wanting this thing to happen. They're wanting this healing. They're wanting people to be saved. They're wanting deliverance. And there's this cheering. There's this kind of frenzied attention and focus. And it turns into something that feels like a pep rally or a game or something, but it's like that. And so the word cheering kind of, and it's also, but it's the way that this event and this man in particular, and that's kind of meshed all together.
Absolutely. And I feel like the book, I mean, it teeters, but it really is like a full-bodied, full-mind exploration into the relationship between healing and faith. And I think your book makes us realize that we can't even talk about healing or faith if we're not talking about the patriarchal assumptions that healing and faith are built upon, right? And so like I want to build to get to that point. But I got questions, fam. I got questions.
I'm here.
And I feel like I'm gonna ask you questions that I was afraid to ask my grandmama, all the other people I went to church with. Here goes my first question. What do deacons do? I mean that question so sincerely. Like I spent my entire youth looking at those brothers in them suits over there. Everybody would like, you know, over there with and like for the life of me, I can't tell you what none of them did. But like I know you would know. So tell me, what do deacons do?
So So if the pastor of the church is kind of the head of the church, right below him is right below, in this case, it's a him, but is the deacon board. And that's people who, are a part of how service runs. They're people who are kind of his, his confidants, or the people where the business of the church comes to. So if you can't get to the pastor, it's the gateway. So, okay, I can't ask the pastor this question because he's busy. Let me go to a deacon. And then the deacon sometimes is not a mouthpiece, but will kind of hear a little bit about to connect us back to the pastor. And it's just this other kind of governing body in the church that's beneath the pastor, the church. And that is the kind of the way that they work. It's a hierarchy of the church in general. Right. The deacon board is men, which is, back to the original problem of the book in general. I mean, there'll be deacons and deaconesses is what they're called, but in the deacon board, they're men. They support the pastor. They kind of are mouthpieces for what he believes. And they don't have the same level of power, but they kind of shield him in some ways. Right. So that's always been an interesting relationship, but that's my understanding of who deacons are and what they do from my research, and then also growing up in Black church.
In my church, the deaconesses, my grandmother was a deaconess, but she also had to run Sunday school, be on the usher board, welcome people into the church, make sure the food was done. And so that was my problem. I was like, I get what the deaconesses do, but I don't understand as much what the deacons do. Choosing Miriam as a character, first of all, but the actual narrator seems to be like the perfect pick for me, partially because we see her faith challenged so early, and it literally is her literal father challenges her faith, and I think that challenge encourages her to challenge the larger father. But can we talk about what went into deciding how old Miriam would be, and whether or not this would be a first person narrative in the first place?
Yeah, so Miriam came whenever it came to me, I always sound so you're a writer, but came to me always sounds so whatever, but it's the way I think about it. Miriam has always been first person for me. And so I felt that, and I'll get to her age. I felt that for this specific story, I needed someone who was of an age that feels I'm a high school teacher in my other life. And so I know 15-year-olds really well. I spend more time with 15-year-olds than adults in a lot of ways. And it's an age where kids start to see themselves as people, start to see the world in a different way, start to question all the things that they've thought or known to be true, and just kind of reshape what their identity actually is. And so with this summer, what's happening for Miriam, it felt really relevant for that to be what's happening, that she's questioning her dad, she's questioning her faith, she's questioning everything that she's learned. If this thing about my dad is true, right, and what else is true and what else is not true, and what have people been lying to me about this whole time? So I think a lot about that. Age is one. As you get older, you still question, but you're less inclined to maybe act on that, or you have a job, you have kids, there's other things that creep into it. Miriam's sole focus in this time is her identity and what she believes, and she was raised in this structure, and she believe it never serve her the way that she has always thought it could or would. And so that's oh, hold on, am I frozen? Right. No, okay.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Good.
It said my internet connection was unstable, and so that's always the kiss of death. So I think that for this story, I had to tell it from Miriam because she's the only person I thought who could objectively see her father. And she was also, because Joanne, the mother, is too steeped in it, and she's been steeped in it for so long that she can part ways with him in some ways, but not in major ways. Right. And can kind of think about, for Miriam, her age and who she is in this family, her position of power or lack thereof allows her to kind of break it all open for the reader. And so for me, she felt like the perfect person to tell the story.
And I love that we have to talk about power in this text, but also literally, what I love about what you do as a writer in this book is that, I don't know if I've read another book narrated by a 15-year-old that was so penetrating but also delicate. And power is ultimately what Miriam is exploring. Her own power, right? Like, yes, she's watching and she's seeing who maybe her father and her mother, and actually like this faith, really what they all are.
Yeah.
While she's coming into her own, not simply as a Black young woman, but as a Black young woman who has the power to heal.
Yeah.
Where did that come into the narrative?
So initially, it was always going to be about power, and it was always going to be about, because it's about patriarchy. It's about who gets power or who assumes that they have power because they use, in this case, the Bible to support the fact that they have power over everyone. But it's about who kind of has the power and is the presumptive keeper of power, who doesn't have power. And then for Miriam, the idea of healing for Miriam didn't come to me. I had a different idea for what I didn't know what I was going to do with her in early drafts. I said, she wants something that her father will tell her that she can't do. I've always known that it was about to be that, because she has to confront head on this patriarchy as it's represented by her dad. And so that's what I knew in the beginning. And then the idea of healing was really fascinating. And I think I was having all these things that she could do and be and want. And I had to streamline and strip down. I said, I can't have 5 threads about all these things. So I had to pick one. And the idea of healing not only being this power that she has, but connecting to the power in the book, also has that mystical element of people talking, the idea of like magic realism and this idea of this thing that feels like she can do this thing and other people can't. So it's kind of a play on this notion of real power as it exists in the world and her family and the church and those structures, and her actually having this kind of power that is different from that power, but also people have told her that she can't have, or that she doesn't have. But I played with that for a bit. And when I finally landed on that, I said, oh, this is what it has to be. And then everything else fell away.
And I think that those of us who were raised in the church, maybe generally, but definitely like Black church, Black Baptist church, Black missionary Baptist church for myself, whenever I would attempt to write into it, like my workshop people would be like, oh my God, this magic realism is amazing, right? And I'd be like, okay, I didn't know that's what that shit was called. But and they'd be like, oh my, are they really, they start drinking grape juice and then all of a sudden they're like dancing? That's, and I'm like, that shit, that's what we saw. But you push it. So you have all of that, and you have some literally magically real stuff happening. Yeah. But I'm interested in the idea of putting like presenting this culture that appears to be magically real to groups of people who aren't of it, next to this character who is absolutely magically real. Can you talk about that? Yeah,
the way that you describe communion, or this idea of what that looks like and what that means, that there's in church, in Black church and specifically, because that's what I was raised in, that's what I know, there is so much that feels, you can't explain it to someone who goes there. You can't tell them like, here's why this happens. You can't explain why the tambourine makes somebody kind of catch the spirit in the aisle. You can't explain those things, right? And so there's this, Donnie's exactly right. It's the Holy Ghost, right?
I got it. I'm about to get it. When you said tambourine, I started like, oh. Yeah.
Right. And so there's that element of church practice in general that is deeply, that for someone who isn't in it feels magical. Like, what does that mean? It's not based in evidence. It's not based in science. So then for Miriam to come into this already set structure and has something really different that actually is this kind of mystical power that, depending upon denominations, people believe in this idea of the spiritual gift of healing by laying on of hands and that. But for Miriam to kind of have that and wield that and have that be something else that can't be explained within this other structure of things that people have a hard time explaining. Like if you go to a Black church, I don't know. It just happens. Like these things happen. Events happen, people, do things and you can't explain it and there's no logic for it. And so that part of that, there's a magic in that practice. And then to have Miriam have her own kind of magic felt really special for me to kind of really weave in and try to tie together.
And the functionality for Black church, I think as artists, is like, it's, and those of us, who grew up in it usually are super critical of it. Those of us who tend to go into the arts. But the functionality of writing from the POV character who is, a young person of faith. And then one by one, you start to see these people who you understandably hoist up on a pedestal. Well, you see the pedestal sort of start to shake. And for me, all of that shit was church-based. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wonder what it feels like to see grown-ups shudder and falter outside of church as a young person. But what you do in this is that you don't allow us to be like, yeah, the grown-ups are, they're not who they attempt to say to be. You actually bring a hefty critique of patriarchy into this organically. And one of the questions that we got was, I'd love to hear more about why we think healing in the Christian church is steeped in patriarchy. I feel like that's like the softball for you. You wanna jump in there?
Sure. So when the idea of kind of healing comes from like the idea of spiritual gifts that come from the Bible. And I think that, before I say that healing is steeped in patriarchy, I think that there's a lot of the church itself. Ayanna Mathis calls it capital C church, which is the religious practice, as opposed to small C church, which is kind of like inside you and kind of faith in general. But I think the patriarchy allows it to kind of flourish, right? Which is this idea of if I can say that these men can do these things, if I can say that these gifts, like speaking in tongues, laying on of hands, all these different kind of spiritual gifts, come to men. And that's actually something that Samuel says he misreads the Bible in the book, which is, he says, oh, these are given to men. And Miriam kind of bristles at that. Like, why can't they be given to women? Because there's this thing that I can do, or that I think I can do. And you've told me forever that I can't do it. And so I think that the first part of that question is, there are so many rituals in the Christian church that are steeped in patriarchy. And then this idea of the Bible then becomes a justification of, well, it's because the Bible says this, and that's why men do this. That's why men do this. That's why men can preach. That's why men can heal. That's why men can lead congregations. That's why men can do this thing. And that's because the Bible says it. Bible says it. And so then healing is just one subset of the things that, because I think it's visible, and in this book, you watch these people get touched by this man, and then Miriam as well, but get touched by someone and fall to the ground and have a spiritual experience. And I think part of it, I would answer that question is the public nature of it, and everything that happens in public spaces in church feels like it's completely dominated by men. And it's the stuff that's behind the scenes. It's that amazing dinner that you get afterward that the mothers of the church made. That's the stuff that isn't acknowledged and validated. And it's like that quiet private service that women are allowed to do. And it's the loud public service that men are allowed to do. And so that's why then I think healing is one more subset. If it's this thing that can actually make your body whole, if people believe that, then based on everything else, it would have to be something that the way that the church would see that in some ways is that something that men do and not something that necessarily women do.
And I'm sort of definitely taken by these narratives that are like family within family, whether it's television narrative of Sopranos, like, the mafia family, the actual family. The church lends itself to that, I think, more than anything, right? Like Miriam's actual family sort of is the head of the church family. But I'm interested in the way, like, I hate people use that word balance. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but whenever I think about writing about what I experienced in the church, I sort of lapse into the comic because I'm afraid of dealing with the sincere, right? Like, and if I write sincerely, it's still going to be comical, but I'm scared of that, right? But more than any book I've read, I feel like balance, again, isn't the right word, but you write sincerely into both familial experiences, and that sincerity allows a kind of comic to come into what obviously also can feel dark and mysterious. Can you talk about this a bit?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I was trying to do, when I set out to write a book, I didn't initially know that it was going to be about church. that was going to be about Black church, because who would intentionally write a book about that? Because why? You don't write it. It's such a loaded topic. People have so many opinions about it. And they're never neutral. No one's ever neutral about religion. It is either, I mean, you can be on spectrums of it, but people are just like, oh, I don't feel any way about religion. You either have negative feelings and there's gradations of that. You have really positive feelings or gradations of that. No one is kind of, I don't know how I feel. Right. But so to have a book that's about religion is already kind of really weighty. And I thought, and I wanted the narrative, and I wanted the narrators, and I wanted the characters themselves to kind of do the exploration. Right. I didn't want as a writer to me to be super heavy-handed on what I want you to think. And so for Miriam at 15, she's not going to turn around and say, my dad's a fraud, all these types of things aren't true. And she's not going to say that, but she can observe a lot of things about him, and she can watch him, and she can watch what he does with her mother. She can watch what he does with her sister. She can watch what happens with Deacon Johnson, who's Micah's father. She can watch him. And then as a reader, I leave you up to make your own conclusions about that. Like, I kind of guide you, but not super firmly. And I wanted to just kind of be really delicate in, this is how Miriam sees the world. And if she's 15, she's not going to be coming down with all this fury about this stuff, because she doesn't yet know how she feels that. So she's just seeing it for the first time. Her world is broken open. And what does one do when everything that they think that they know to be true falls away? And that's, I guess, the dance I try to do all the way through, which is not to tell you how to think about this world or in this family, but to let you think how you want to think about them. And I think you can draw a bunch of conclusions about them. But I didn't want to force you into, this really didactic way of reading a book. I wanted you to see Miriam, and I want you to see Miriam how she sees the world. And I didn't want to be too super heavy on that. And
I feel like to pull that off, it would have been easy to craft Ma, because to Miriam, the character is Ma, like sort of faintly, right? Because Pa carries a lot culturally. Pa's carry a lot, blah, blah. Miriam has her healing power. So does Pa, supposedly. But I feel like to pull this book off, you had to texture her mother. And was that always, I mean, of course you always want to texture every character, but at what point did you realize, man, like this relationship sort of, I mean, to me, it feels like either the engine or like the co-engine of the piece. And that is not to take anything away from Pa and Miriam and everything else, but like that to me is the mysterious one. Like, I'm like, oh, like every time I'm like, damn, but can we talk about that? There's a lot of shit going on between those two that's unspoken and that we sort of get, but we, can we get in there?
Yeah. I will say to you that I had to work, the characters I had to work the hard, I mean, I worked hard on all of them, but the mother in specific ways, I had to be really intentional about making her, it was this balance between making her sympathetic in some ways, making her also, making the relationship with Miriam this really secretive, but close and intimate. And Miriam is her confidant. She goes to, she kind of goes to her daughter and kind of lets her, she puts a bunch of stuff on her daughter that her daughter doesn't to go. She has to kind of put it somewhere. And it was hard because initially, I keep saying my internet connection's unstable. Initially, she sees her mom and her dad in a really similar light, not in the same, because her father is kind of the head of stuff, but she just does what her mom wants her to do. She listens to the kind of the views that her mom gives her, but she doesn't question it initially. But I had to make the mother, number one, she's the one character who had the father did as well, but a secular background prior to joining this family. Yes. So she was not religious. She has this really interesting thing where her faith merges with her marriage. And so she just went to this place and kind of got wrapped up and fell in love with this man and went off with this man and had his kids and is married to him. But found her husband Samuel and found God at the same time. And so she just kind of is this interesting person of, I think that the reader, what I hope the reader sees in Joanne Ma's character is some regret that she expresses to Miriam for choices, but at the same time, I don't know if we think as readers that that's going to change, that she's with him. She's also bound with him. And in that sense, it's like, you know, the idea that the way the church teaches about marriage, she's staying, you know, she's cast her lot in with his. They have 4 children by the end of the book together, and she is in. And so I think for her, I had to make her sympathetic in some ways. I had to make her really frustrating in other ways. The idea of kind of the ways that she is kind of absent as Miriam is kind of brutalized by her father, and the mother doesn't stand up for her. So there's that part that is really hard to reconcile and hard to understand. Then there's the closeness of the two of them. Miriam is really frustrated by her. She wants her mom to be better, and she wants her mom to stand up to her dad more, and her mom either won't or can't. And I don't know. So I really had to, and I played a lot with it. My editor and I had lots of conversations about the mother being too, like sometimes she would switch she was too mercurial, is the word my editor used. And I had to work to soften those edges out and make her less kind of, you know, reactive, and make her just this character that, Joanne's, she's tough, and she was tough to write. But I also know that Miriam needs her, because you're absolutely right. That relationship is the kind of the secondary engine of the book. I mean, they're embedded together, and they read Song of Solomon, and there are things that they do that kind of nurture them, but that no one else knows. And in their private life, they only have each other. And yet Miriam is so frustrated by her mom isn't who she wants her mom to be.
Oh, we got 2 good questions that I think connect to this last question. One is from Anonymous. Do you think there's a connection between patriarchy / power hierarchies and healing as a practice that suggests there are correct and incorrect broken bodies or minds? Thinking of when Miriam tries to, quote unquote, fix Hannah on the same stage as Samuel ruled over.
I would say I think there is. I think that's a fantastic question. I do think so. I think, incorrect or correct. I don't know if I would say that in general, that religion would say that. I think that in practice, like for someone like Samuel, who needs everything to be really cut and dry and really clear and really black and white, there absolutely is a connection. Like you are either healed or not healed, or broken or you're not broken, which is why I have Hannah in there as a character, in the sense of in your own family. He sees Hannah as one of his failures, which is he couldn't heal her. And then for Miriam, who becomes, Miriam takes on the pride that she kind of hates in her father. Miriam assumes that at the end, and thinks that she can do this thing that I think, as the reader knows, like this is not going to go well for anyone. Like this is not what this should be. And Miriam kind of has a moment where she slips into what is kind of corrupted her father, and that's what makes her think that she can do this thing that she realizes by the end that there's not such a thing as a broken body. But I think that Samuel thinks it all the way through. And there's the other connection with Joanne, when after she has Isaac, and Samuel won't heal her because he doesn't believe that, and that's another black any kind of mental illness, any kind of emotional, just anything that's happening with emotional distress, that's a faith issue. That's not a thing. That's like, oh, you just don't have enough faith. You need to pray more to get rid of your depression, pray more to get rid of your anxiety, pray more to get rid of this. And so I do think there's a connection between patriarchy and healing, the idea of broken and not broken. The idea of, because but I think that's the people's spin on religion and faith. I don't think that religion as itself would say that, or faith would say that, because it's people come as they are, and there's no such thing kind of in God's eyes as that. But I think Samuel perverts that in lots of ways. Definitely. And with that patriarchal lens, then yes, I think that there is that connection between those two things.
I like that. All right, I want to make sure we get these questions in before, I don't know when they're gonna cut us off. And this is connected to, I'm curious about this from Jamie. I'm curious about the power, healing, and sisterhood in the narrative, and how Monica thought about that. Mom's relationship with her sisters provides possibility or opportunity for another life, and perhaps that mirrors Miriam and her sister.
That's a great question.
I guess.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess the person is asking, do you agree? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. I think that ways in which in this book and in this world, women are allowed to have power is in these ways that are really, I would almost say, are not the public ways. So power and healing, Miriam spends a fair amount of time in this book taking care of her younger sister. She is the mother for her younger sister. She puts her to bed, she bathes her, she wakes her up in the morning, she gets her, she feeds her, she does all those things. And so Miriam, in that sense, from the beginning of the book, has this notion of this idea of healing and what it means to heal, even though that's not recognized. Like this idea of kind of, her father would never recognize that as healing because it's not on a stage in front of people. It doesn't have oil. You can't witness it. You can't have an audience. But Miriam, in the beginning of the book, in one of the early chapters, she hears her father and her brother listening in the other room, reciting scripture, and she's bathing her sister. And that's the work, right? That's the healing, except it's not given the lens and the power. And same thing for Ma and her sisters. There's a possibility, there's another life that she has. She wants to explore this one time in the book that I won't give away. And she stays. But I do think a lot about the redemptive power of being a sister. There's a lot of healing between the women in the book, between Miriam and Hannah, between Ma and Miriam. And, but it will never be recognized because it's not public and it's not the ways that women are allowed to have power in the church or in this family.
I love that. And this is one of like the questions I wanted to ask you, whether we were on Zoom or not. I'm going to ask this question, then I want to get to Hank Dunn's last question. Well, what grades do you teach?
Right now, I teach actually all four. I teach 9th grade, English 1, and then I teach a creative writing class with 10th through 12th graders. But I've taught, but not high school.
Okay.
High school English.
So one of the questions I have is for teachers of regardless of how old your students are, but do we have a responsibility or even the capacity to heal as teachers of high school kids and or any children? Like what I wonder what healing, like how we are supposed to, or if we are at all supposed to wield that in the classrooms. And I know you're probably like, damn, I ain't signed up for that question, but I just want to hear you talk about healing and faith like forever. But pedagogically, I'm interested in like are we supposed to be healers?
I think that's such a great question. I think that here's the tricky part. People think about school as you have lessons and that's what you're here for. But I can't teach you if you come to me and you are not, another need's not being met, right? And so I can only be effective if you are present in the ways you can be present in an English classroom, not wanting to read Zora Neale Hurston, but the ways that your body's in the room, you're with me, you're listening. But there's so much in those relationships, either in class, outside of class, where I am healer, counselor, mentor, that person. And so I have all these conversations about anxiety and doubt and fear of the future, whatever. And that's a relationship that I cultivate with my students and that I really cherish with them. And and then COVID hit, and screen, and they needed every little bit of kind of connection I could give them. So that mattered way more. It's always mattered to me. It mattered way more in the pandemic when my kids last year were seniors who missed prom and didn't get a prom and a graduation. And I'm on a screen with kids who are bawling, just telling them, I don't know what's going to happen right now. You're going to be okay. It's going to be fine. So I always have had that in me. I've always wanted to be that person. And I felt that way more during COVID, where kids are so needy. And the idea of wellness of kids has been kind of prioritized more so than, academics are there, but we're also trying to make sure kids are healthy and well.
Yeah. I mean, when I was a kid, I don't think that position existed, right? I mean, I feel like our teachers had that position. With some of them wanted to, and some of them didn't want to take that on. Before I ask this last question, I want to just encourage y'all please, especially if you down south, especially if you're Mississippi, you need to get this book for yourself, for people who purport to be believers, followers, faithful folks. This is the book we need to be reading and talking about as a state, for real, for real. So please jump on that and get that. All right, last question from Hank. Done. Monica, would you please talk about your literary influences? Did you read as a child? Can you talk about that? Whose writing do you most admire, and are your students reading today? So there's like 3 or 4 questions in there. So
there are a few.
What you want? Yeah.
Okay. I can't begin anything, and I even had to do it in the book. There's nothing in me that doesn't exist without Toni Morrison. So that is the, you know, even one of the ways for me of the way I see the world, everything she's ever written, including even Playing in the Dark. I mean, there's ways I've just thought about the world so differently because of what she's done and her scholarship and her writing. So that's someone that has always been there. Alice Walker, Zora Neale Hurston. I really, James Baldwin, Richard Wright, Ralph Ellison. So like Black authors that shaped worlds that I couldn't see and I wasn't in, but I felt myself in them and I saw myself in those books. We read Native Son when I was in 10th grade English in my high school outside of Cleveland, Ohio. And I'm not bigger, but I saw myself in a world for almost the first time since I'd been reading. And that was just this really transformative experience for me. I read a ton as a kid. My mom, when we were growing up, my mom and I were just talking about this the other day. We'd go to the library once a week. My mom was a teacher, is now a professor. But when we were growing up, my mother would take us to the library once a week. And we had those, remember the plastic bags with little kind of handles on top?
Yeah.
So we'd fill those up with books, and I'd get new ones every week. And I read all the time. And we couldn't watch TV. We read books, and we played outside. And I loved reading as a kid. So it was huge to me. And that, I think that was kind of, I think, where I learned to imagine, because I didn't have the world fed to me. I had to pretend stuff, and I just played around with things like, oh, this isn't real, but I'm gonna write. And so I started writing when I was 9, I think, because I was reading a lot. So in terms of literary influences, that's the writing I'd know. Who's writing today besides Kiese, who of course is amazing. We were talking about that before we got on. People right now who I'm reading, I love Justin Ward, Britt Bennett, Caitlin Greenidge, whose posters behind you, Nafisa Thompson Spires, Donnie Walton. So lots of people I admire right now who are writing. And then my students, they're out of school officially. They finished the year reading, The Effluent Engine. So they finished the year with that. So, yep. Little Afrofuturism for the 9th graders at the end of the year.
Yes.
So some N.K. Jemisin for everyone.
Yo, it's changed, fam. Like these classrooms have changed because you were in them. I could have gone through Jackson. There wasn't a you teaching no classes when I was coming up. So anyway, thank you for that. I have lots more questions about faith and about the way you layered and textured this book. I feel like plot-wise, you do this thing where the plot splinters and then it splinters again. And you just, as a reader / writer, you're like, wait, how is she gonna pull this shit off? But then like those last paragraphs, fam, I just want, if you get this book, please watch the way those last paragraphs in that last chapter are crafted. Every word in there matters. And I think you bring all of it together. But you still got to work. It's not like this isn't, I mean, it's pleasurable, but it's not like super, super duper easy, which is like great literature, especially in the walking the path of Morrison should be and do. So thank you so much. I'm grateful, I'm thankful, and thank you, Square Books, for doing what you do always. Thank y'all.
Yeah.
This has been such a joy and a pleasure for me. So thank you.
Y'all, that was so wonderful. I'm sorry that we have to stop ever. And I realized I buried the lead a little bit about this book. So we talked a lot about the most important part of the book, which is the actual story and the craft and the incredible care and talent that you put into it. But I do kind of want to brag on the production department, because it do you see how it glistens?
Yes, man.
I mean, like, you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but it's a beautiful book inside out, and it's such a pleasure to hand sell it and have on our shelves. And we do have well, Right, wrong page. There we go. Signed bookplate editions, and Monica's got a beautiful signature. This is actually our signed first editions pick for May, and we are so proud to send that out to our subscribers. And I would like to remind everyone who joined us this evening, first of all, thank you for doing that. But these events would not be possible without your support, and this is I think this is a good place to start if you've not yet shopped with us before, because I know we've got some new faces. And but to just kind of wrap it up, you know, Monica, I didn't realize that you were a high school teacher, and I just want to thank you both for you know, being there for our students and loving them and supporting them always, but especially this year, fostering that love and kind of safe harbor that literature can give all of us, but especially younger people. And I think Kiese, you said thankful and grateful. I feel exactly the same way. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, and best of luck with the rest of the book tour. But we look forward to hosting you in Oxford in real life for the next
Love
one.
that.
No
Yes.
pressure. Take your
You gotta
time.
come. You gotta come.
Yes. Yes.
to.
I have an
All
invitation. I have to come now.
right.
Please. Yeah. All right. Well, y'all take care. Good night, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you so much.